was from the massive No Kings protest in Washington, D.C., folks. Millions of Americans and millions of people across the world showed up at No Kings protests, protesting Donald Trump and his despicable regime. We're waiting for the official numbers, but folks, the protests were absolutely massive. I attended my local No Kings protest. It was so great to see all of y'all out there. Let me just show you some of the images of these No Kings protests.
Something happened on March 28, 2026, that no American president in the history of this country had ever faced before. Not Nixon, not Andrew Johnson, not anyone. On a single Saturday, an estimated 8 to 9 million people poured into the streets across the United States in what organizers and independent analysts are already calling the largest single-day act of political protest in American history. From the smallest farming towns of Iowa and the wide-open plains of Montana to the great cities of New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, and Washington, D.C., from rural Idaho to the beaches of Hawaii, from London to Paris to Rome to Tokyo, millions of people looked at what is happening in this country and said in one unified voice that in America we do not have kings and we will not become a country that does. Welcome back to USA Press. If you are new to this channel, subscribe right now and hit the bell so you never miss a story like this one, because what happened on March 28, 2026 is not just a news event. It is a chapter in American history that is still being written, and we are going to give you the full picture, the depth, the context, and everything that the mainstream news cycle glosses over. Let's get into it.
And folks, this is Donald Trump's nightmare right here, when the people go out and make their presence felt, and shoulder to shoulder across the world, we say no to Donald Trump and this despicable regime. Look at this massive crowd that gathered in Boston, Massachusetts. Huge crowd there. Take a look at this massive crowd that gathered in Chicago, Illinois. We also worked with Status Quo. We were on the ground in Chicago. As you know, separately, we were on the ground in Minnesota. Our live stream had tens of thousands of people watching in unison. It'll probably have over 1 million to probably 2 million views when all is said and done right there. But look at this massive crowd in Chicago. I'll show you more of that in a moment. You got this massive crowd right here in Philadelphia. Shout out to all the Midas Philly folk out there. Take a look at San Francisco, California, where once again they formed a massive human sign on Ocean Beach reading "Trump must go now." Shout out Ryan Curry and the San Francisco Chronicle for capturing that incredible image. They do great work there. Look at the No Kings protesters right here in Madison, Wisconsin. We see you, Madison. The No Kings protest in Lansing, Michigan. We see you, Michigan. The No Kings protesters in Nashville, Tennessee. Shout out Tennessee. The No Kings protest in Buffalo, New York. The No Kings protesters in Washington, D.C. The No Kings protesters in West Palm Beach, Florida, who just elected a new House District Representative there in a +11 Trump district, who is a Democrat right now. That district flipped Democrat, a +25 to +30% over performance right there. Incredible. Take a look at the No Kings protesters in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Shout out there. The Villages in Florida. Folks, even a huge crowd gathered in London, England for a protest there. And I love the ingenious signs like this one right here. Send Barron. Do your part. Absolutely. Get Barron in that war in Iran. That's what should really be going down right now.
The No Kings movement did not begin on March 28th. To understand what happened this weekend, you have to go back to its origins. The first No Kings Day took place on June 14, 2025, Trump's 79th birthday, and it was timed to coincide with the U.S. Army's 250th anniversary parade, a celebration Trump had orchestrated for himself in Washington, D.C. Americans across the country, organized by progressive groups, including Indivisible, Move On, and the 5501 movement, responded by flooding the streets. Estimates put attendance at somewhere between 4 and 6 million people across roughly 2,100 sites nationwide. Independent data journalist G. Elliott Morris crunched the numbers and concluded that roughly 1% to nearly 2% of the entire U.S. population had attended a No Kings event that day. The Guardian called it potentially among the biggest single-day protests in American history, and that was just round one. By October 2025, the second No Kings Day drew close to 7 million people across approximately 2,700 sites. Something significant was shifting in the composition of the crowd. Researchers affiliated with the nonpartisan Brookings Institution and American University had been surveying protesters since the Women's March of 2017, and they noted a striking change. These protests were no longer just partisan echo chambers of liberal urban voters venting Democratic rage. The demographic profile was broadening. Former Republicans, suburban families, veterans, independent voters, people who had never protested anything in their lives were showing up. That trend continued and accelerated on March 28th, and it is one of the most politically significant facts of this entire story. Now to the March 28th protest itself, and the scale is almost too large to fully process. Organizers confirmed more than 3,300 events in all 50 states.
And folks, take a look right here, the massive flagship protest for this No Kings, Minneapolis, Minnesota, where Midas Touch Network had our camera crew as well. Our camera crew, thanks to all of your support, is all across the country. And again, shout out to the folks at Status Quo, because didn't they do an absolutely amazing job in Minnesota? They risked their lives. Their reporters are incredible. Subscribe to Status Quo. We see you, Status Quo. You do great work. All right. Governor Walz right here spoke at the Minnesota event in front of that crowd. Looked to be hundreds of thousands of people right there. We'll get the official numbers soon. And Governor Walz says, we will never leave the side of these Somali Minnesotans. Here, play this clip.
And I will add a special thank you and a special acknowledgement that we will never leave the side of our Somali Minnesotans. Here's our pledge to you. Our Somali Minnesotans, your great-grandchildren will still be here when that orange clown is in the dustbin of history. You will be here.
More from this powerful speech by Governor Walz. He says, I have this message for our immigrant community. Let's play it.
And I have a message to our immigrant community here in Minnesota. You are seen, heard, valued, and loved. You add value to our state. You are part of the fabric of what is good about Minnesota. And I have to tell you, that is a hell of a lot more than I'll say about anybody in the White House.
I'm going to show you a few more clips of Governor Walz's speech. Then I want to show you Senator Sanders' speech. Then I want to show you Senator Warnock's speech. Then I want to show you some of the protesters that we were able to interview through our collaboration with the great folks at Status Quo. More from Governor Walz right here saying, yeah, Donald Trump wants to call us radicals. Play this clip.
They call us radicals. I see that the president said it's a bunch of radicals. You're damn right we've been radicalized. Radicalized by compassion. Radicalized by decency. Radicalized by due process. Radicalized by democracy. And radicalized to do all we can to oppose authoritarianism. So for those of you watching at home, welcome to the North Star State. Welcome to the land of hope and dreams.
More from Governor Walz right here. Let's play it.
We are still in when democracy itself seems to be at risk. It was Minnesota who said, not on our watch, not on our watch. You are the heart and soul of what the nation saw that is good in this nation. But make no mistakes about it. They did damage. They killed Renee and Alex. They traumatized our neighbors. And just be very clear, our weather may be a little cool, but our people are warm and we're fierce. And my message, because this is not over, don't ever mistake our kindness for weakness. We demand justice for Renee Good and Alex Preddy. We demand justice for every single person who was hurt or traumatized. We will never forget what they did here. And I have a message to our immigrant community here in Minnesota. You are seen, heard, valued, and loved.
Let's take a look at what Senator Bernie Sanders had to say. Powerful words. Let's play it.
Today, here in Minnesota, in Vermont, and in every state in the country, we say loudly and proudly that as Americans, we will never forsake our heritage. We will never accept authoritarianism. We will never accept oligarchy. And we will never accept a president who is a pathological liar, a kleptocrat, and a narcissist who is undermining the Constitution of the United States and the rule of law every day. We will never accept government policy that gives massive tax breaks to billionaires, throws 15 million Americans off the health care they have, breaks unions, denies women the right to control their own bodies, and is pushing the planet closer and closer to a climate crisis.
That is not a typo. Every single state in the Union had organized resistance taking place on the same day. Nearly half of all events were held in traditionally Republican or battleground states. Texas had over 100 events, Florida had over 100, Ohio had over 100, Idaho, Wyoming, and Utah each had events in the double digits. A protest took place in Kotzebue, Alaska, one of the most remote communities in the country. Red Oak, Iowa, a conservative farming town, had people in the streets. People stood on the sides of rural highways in states that had voted for Trump by double-digit margins, holding signs and waving at passing cars because they were done. Done with the Iran war. Done with the mass deportation raids. Done with federal agents in their communities. Done with the cost of living crisis that this administration's policies had made worse. According to organizers, 2/3 of all people who turned out on March 28th did not live in major cities. That figure had risen sharply from the very first No King's Day. This was no longer a coastal elite phenomenon. This was America. In the major cities, the turnout was staggering. In Philadelphia, approximately 100,000 people marched. In Chicago, around 75,000 filled the streets. In New York, tens of thousands descended on Times Square and Midtown Manhattan, marching south holding signs reading, "No war, abolish ICE," and a particularly memorable one that said, simply, "So bad, even introverts are here." In Los Angeles, a giant inflatable blimp of Donald Trump dressed as a diaper-clad baby floated above the crowds near City Hall. In Washington, D.C., marchers crossed the Memorial Bridge from Arlington into the Capitol, streaming toward the National Mall, chanting pro-democracy slogans and holding banners reading, "Trump must go now" and "Fight fascism." In West Palm Beach, just miles from Mar-a-Lago, Trump's own backyard, protesters and counter-protesters, including some wearing Proud Boys gear, came face-to-face before demonstrations turned peaceful again. In Dallas, Enrique Tarrio, the former Proud Boys leader, led a counter-protest, and minor clashes broke out before police made arrests. In Los Angeles, tear gas was deployed outside a federal building after some protesters threw objects over a fence, and multiple people were arrested. The protests were overwhelmingly peaceful, but the friction at the edges told a story of just how raw the moment is for this country. Now let's talk about Minneapolis and St. Paul, because the Twin Cities were at the absolute emotional center of this movement on March 28th, and for very specific reasons. Minnesota had become the symbol of everything the No Kings movement is fighting against. In January 2026, the Trump administration launched what it called Operation Metro Surge, an aggressive crackdown involving approximately 3,000 federal immigration agents deployed to the Twin Cities area. The operation was militaristic in its scope and its methods, and it ended with the deaths of 2 American citizens, Renee Good and Alex Preddy, both shot and killed by federal officers in separate incidents. Their deaths sent shockwaves through Minnesota and the country. Tens of thousands of Minnesotans took to the streets. There were general strikes. The resistance was extraordinary, and eventually the pressure wore down the administration's push in that city. Minnesota became, in the words of Senator Bernie Sanders, the place where the world learned what democracy is about, what grassroots activism is about, and what standing up for the American ideals of freedom and justice truly means. That is why the flagship No Kings event on March 28th was held in St. Paul. 3 separate marches began at noon from different locations around the city, converging on the grounds of the Minnesota State Capitol for a rally that drew an estimated 200,000 people, according to organizers, and approximately 100,000 according to the Minnesota State Patrol's official count. Either number is extraordinary. The energy was unlike anything the state had seen in living memory.
More from Senator Bernie Sanders on the unlawful war in Iran. Let's play it.
At a time when the American people are politically divided, there is one issue that is bringing us together. Conservatives, moderates, and progressives are speaking out in unison: end this war. And
here he talks about how Donald Trump and his partner Netanyahu started this war that no Americans want to be in right now. Play this clip.
1 month ago, Trump and his partner, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, started a war with Iran. This war is unconstitutional. Trump did not seek or receive authorization from Congress. This war is a violation of international law. One sovereign nation cannot simply go about attacking another sovereign nation for any reason it chooses.
And here's what Senator Sanders says, that historians who write about this moment will always talk about the courage of the fine folks in Minnesota. We love you, Minnesota. Play this clip.
And thanks to the millions of Americans from our smallest towns to our largest cities in every state in our country who are gathering today at thousands of rallies. It is absolutely appropriate that we hold a major No Kings rally right here in the St. Paul, Minneapolis area. When historians write about this dangerous moment in American history, when they write about courage and sacrifice, the people of Minnesota will deserve a special chapter for themselves. In the face of unprecedented occupation of this city by ICE, Trump's domestic army, this community stood up and with extraordinary solidarity fought back and won. Minnesota showed the American people, and in fact the world, what democracy is about, what grassroots activism is about, and what standing up for the American ideals of freedom and justice is about.
Let's hear from Senator Raphael Warnock during his No Kings Day speech in Atlanta. Shout out to all the Midas Mighty in Atlanta. Play this clip.
And I'm afraid that a wannabe king who is busy building himself and his billionaires a ballroom intends to use ICE as his own private army to do his bidding to make him king, but he is not a king. This is our land. This belongs to we the people. And these powers that he arrogates to himself, these buildings that he tries to put his name on, these things no more belong to him than that fake Nobel Peace Prize that he has somebody to give him.
The stage lineup was a remarkable convergence of political leaders, cultural icons, and musical legends. Governor Tim Walz took the stage dressed in flannel on a cold, blustery March day, and he came out swinging. He looked out at the sea of people who had marched through Minneapolis neighborhoods and past the spots where Renee Good and Alex Pretty had been killed, and he spoke to them not as a politician giving a campaign speech, but as a Minnesotan who was furious and proud at the same time. He called Minnesota the freest state in the nation and demanded justice for the damage done by Operation Metro Surge. He went after Trump directly. He told the crowd that when the wannabe dictator sent his untrained aggressive thugs to Minnesota, it was the people of that state who stood up for their neighbors. And then he said something that has since been quoted everywhere: "Do not ever mistake our kindness for weakness." He also said something that should be heard by every American who has been told that caring about your neighbors is somehow radical. He said that this movement was radicalized by compassion, radicalized by decency, radicalized by due process, radicalized by democracy, and radicalized to do all they could to oppose authoritarianism. In Walz's telling, the word radical was not an insult. It was a badge of honor earned by people who refused to look away while their government did things they knew were wrong. Then Bruce Springsteen took the stage. The boss, now in his late 70s, came out with his guitar and performed a brand new song called Streets of Minneapolis, written specifically about the deaths of Renee Good and Alex Pretty and the community that had surrounded them in grief and resistance. The crowd of hundreds of thousands erupted. Maggie Rogers followed, bringing out Joan Baez and Tom Morello of Rage Against the Machine to perform Bob Dylan's The Times They Are A-Changing. Morello, characteristically, changed one of his verses on the fly, singing that Minneapolis was beyond the administration's command. Jane Fonda did not give a speech, but instead took the stage and read aloud a personal statement from Becca Good, the widow of Renee Good. That moment stopped the crowd cold. A woman's voice, spoken by one of America's most enduring activist icons, bearing witness to the most intimate kind of loss. Actor Robert De Niro, who could not attend in person, sent a recorded video message calling Trump an existential threat to America's freedoms and security, and praising the courage and commitment of Minnesota's protesters. Senator Bernie Sanders delivered what is already being called one of the most important political speeches of this era. He told the crowd that in 1789, when the founders of this nation declared that in this new country we don't want kings, they were drawing a line that still runs through American history. And he told them that in 2026, the message of the people in those streets was exactly the same. No more kings. We will not allow this country to descend into authoritarianism or oligarchy. In America, we the people will rule. But Sanders did not stop at Trump. He broadened his indictment to include what he called the handful of the wealthiest people on earth who have taken over the economy, taken over the political system, and taken over the media in order to enrich themselves at the expense of working families. He called out Elon Musk by name. He called out Jeff Bezos. He called out Mark Zuckerberg and Larry Ellison. He said that never before in American history has the top 1% owned more wealth than the bottom 93% combined, and never before have the super rich expanded that wealth so rapidly. And then he turned to the Iran war, calling it unconstitutional, a violation of international law, and drawing a direct comparison to Vietnam and Iraq. Two wars, he reminded the crowd, that the American people were lied into, and two wars whose consequences are still being lived with today. He closed by saying that the future of the entire world was hanging in the balance, and that the actions taken now would determine what that future looked like.
And also, even though I've highlighted certain cities, if I haven't called your city and town, shout out to your city and town. I'm just obviously doing a cursory review of all the No Kings protests. But I know in small cities, small towns, big counties, small counties, people showed up today. And thank you for doing your part to get out there, peacefully protest, and spread the word. We're so honored to have you on our side. And it was so great to see so many of you at the No Kings protest I attended. Just take a look at this huge crowd at No Kings Chicago. Status Quo was able to capture video right here on the ground. As you know, we partner with Status Quo to get you this type of footage. This is Status Quo on the ground. Let's play it.
I'm going to show you the scope of this crowd. Again, this is Chicago, Illinois. And you see there that we can't even see the edge of the crowd. I'm lifting the camera, I don't know, 4 or 5 feet above my head right now. And I don't think you can see the edge of the crowd. I'm trying to see through the viewfinder of the camera, and I don't see the edge of it anywhere out here.
I want to share with you with some of the interviews they got in Chicago, some real powerful stuff right here. Here are some No Kings protesters speaking to the great J.T. Sikowski right here, and they said, we need to fall away from worshiping the oligarchs. Play this clip.
Fall away from, like, worshiping oligarchs is really the major tone that I've got in my heart. Just people that have way more money than they know what to do with, not helping out their fellow man. I want to go back to the glory days of, people being taxed appropriately to fund institutions like libraries and schools and museums to better off our culture.
The glory days when government just kind of funded public services.
Yeah, exactly. The glory days, yeah.
I've always felt very strongly about it, but I think I've been very passive in my life about a lot of the things I am passionate about, but I think it's time to make that change in my life. And, nothing's going to change until you do something. So, and, they say every voice matters, but it really does, because it's millions versus a lot versus the few type of thing. But it's an important cause. It's the right thing to do, I think.
Now, this was an incredible moment where these two protesters understood that Donald Trump and Netanyahu's disastrous and catastrophic war in Iran was about distracting from the Epstein files. That's why everyone's calling it Operation Epstein Fury, or the Jeffrey Epstein War. Let's play the clip.
Well, last No Kings protest, he posted an AI video of him flying a plane over the protesters and dropping poop on them. So I'm just trying to repay the favor.
And it's a picture there of a jet dropping, looks like turds onto a cartoon version of Donald Trump. We'll let the audience be able to see it there in its full glory.
He's a clown. He doesn't get a crown. We don't have kings in this country.
Don't have kings in this country. What is making you feel like in this moment you have to be in the streets?
Well, of course I want to say the war, but what I really want to say is the Epstein files. And we just can't drop that. The war is a big distraction. Everything he does is a distraction from the Epstein files. Got to end the corruption. Got to open the files. This is what we got to do.
When I was in high school, you would not have caught me dead at a protest, especially on my spring break. So the fact that you are out here makes me want to say, like, are you a canary in a coal mine? Are you an example of like how more people your age are feeling right now, that they feel like they have to be in the streets, or is this kind of or are you an exception?
I would say I'm kind of like most people now. I feel like a few years ago, not a lot of people would have been like talking about politics my age or anything. But now, like, at school, like, it's what is on everybody's mind. Everybody's talking about it.
Charlotte, it's interesting that you say, you see the Epstein files you see the war in Iran as a distraction from the Epstein files, and really everything as a distraction from that issue. This is a distraction that has real consequences. I mean, Americans are dying, but then more immediate, I don't know if you have anybody who's serving right now in your family, but at least if you don't, I would expect that more immediacy would be of, like, economic concerns. Price of gas is the obvious one. But are there other ways that you're feeling, the state of this economy right now? And if so, what are they?
Oh, first of all, let me say I come from a military family, so I absolutely respect and honor our service people. I hate it that we're sending service people over there to be injured and to die to fight this war. So I want to be really clear that I have a deep respect for the military. Gas, groceries, everything. That's where we're seeing it. Again, I just want to go back to, we have to believe women, we have to believe the survivors, we have to believe the victims, and all of it, Trump just doesn't hear what the people want, and we are the people.
In Atlanta, Senator Raphael Warnock addressed a march of over 1,000 people who had walked to the Georgia state capitol. Warnock, whose church was the pulpit of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., brought the moral weight of that history into his remarks. He spoke about what it means to reject king-like power in a country that was founded on the belief that no person, no matter how powerful, stands above the law or above the people. He reminded those gathered that the rights Americans take for granted were not given. They were fought for, generation by generation, and they can be taken away if people do not defend them. Georgia, he noted, had over 50 protest events scheduled that day, stretching from Atlanta to Savannah to small cities and towns across the state. Internationally, the protests spread across Europe and beyond. In London, thousands marched holding signs reading "Stop the Far Right" and "Stand Up to Racism" alongside "No Kings" banners, with particular anger directed at the Iran war. In Paris, hundreds of Americans living in France gathered at the Bastille, a location chosen deliberately, a monument to the moment when a people said enough to royal power, alongside French labor unions and human rights organizations. In Amsterdam, Madrid, and Rome, roughly 20,000 people combined marched under heavy police presence. In Rome, the protest broadened to encompass opposition to the American and Israeli strikes on Iran, as well as criticism of Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. In Tokyo, protests were organized. In countries with constitutional monarchies, the demonstrations went by the name "No Tyrants" or "No Dictators" in deference to the different political context. The message, however, was identical everywhere. The world is watching what is happening to American democracy, and it is alarmed. Now, what does all of this mean politically? That is the question that every analyst, every Republican strategist, and every Trump loyalist was quietly wrestling with on the morning of March 29th. The numbers tell a brutal story for this administration. A Reuters and Ipsos poll released just days before the protests put Trump's approval rating at 36%, the lowest of his entire second term. The Quinnipiac poll found a 56% overall disapproval rating, with 58% disapproval on the economy and 59% disapproval each on foreign policy and the Iran war specifically. A new Fox News poll found nearly 60% of respondents disapproved of the job Trump was doing. These are not liberal media polls. Fox News. Nearly 60%. And the data on special elections was even more alarming for Republicans. Democrats had been winning every competitive special election since Trump returned to office, often by double-digit margins compared to their 2024 performance. The week before the protests, a first-time Democratic candidate flipped a Florida State House district that includes Mar-a-Lago, Trump's own backyard. Protest organizers told reporters they had seen a surge in organizing interest and voter registration in states that had seemed unreachable for Democrats just 2 years ago: Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, Utah.
And then this one protester talks about how Trump is literally a tyrant. Let's play this clip.
Trump is literally a tyrant. I mean, king is what people can relate to, but without a doubt, he's behaving as a madman and a tyrant who's, trying, and unfortunately somewhat successfully, to take over the entire government. And Tyrannosaurus Rex symbolizes that destroys everything in its path. And that's what Trump is about: destruction and violence. And it's a perfect symbol for what Trump is doing right now and what we're all against. I think he's fundamentally a thief. I think he's fundamentally a criminal. He came up in New York, trained by mobsters. Yeah, he's stealing the country blind, and I also think he's psychotic. I mean, he's got this violence impulse. He uses violence against, and he's an extortionist, in true mob fashion. And yeah, he's going to. What we all see is him using all those tendencies, and it's getting worse. I think from what we all see, I think we're going to have 10 million people out on the streets today, and trying to get to that 3% where, the objective here realistically is to flip the House and the Senate Democratic in the fall, and then try to impeach him. Try to impeach him. By that time, there's going to be a lot more damage done in this country, where there's going to be a lot more support and pressure on even Republicans to impeach him and get him out of office.
There you have it, folks. Let me know what you think. We appreciate you for watching, sticking with us, fighting with you, shoulder to shoulder. Thanks for watching our coverage. Everybody hit subscribe. Let's get to 7 million subscribers. We're almost there, folks. We're almost there. Thanks for watching.
Leah Greenberg, co-founder of Indivisible, one of the key organizing groups behind No Kings, said that competitive suburban districts, the kinds of places that decide national elections, were showing enormous increases in civic engagement. She cited specific suburbs in Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Arizona. These are the exact battlegrounds that determined the 2024 election, and they are now showing up in protest marches. Sociologists at Northwestern University and the Brookings Institution compared what they were seeing to the Tea Party movement of 2009 and 2010, the grassroots conservative uprising that swept Republicans back into Congress the following year. The parallel cuts in a direction that should terrify the GOP heading into November 2026. The White House, for its part, dismissed the protests as having little public support, a statement that was immediately difficult to reconcile with 8 million people in the streets of every single state in the Union. The National Republican Congressional Committee also dismissed the movement. But privately, Republican strategists were not nearly as confident. Multiple reports indicated concern inside the party that the protests were revealing exactly the kind of broad suburban and independent voter alienation that tends to produce midterm wave elections. Democrats had already won every special election held since January 2025. The House majority was genuinely at risk, and the Senate map was looking increasingly difficult for Republicans to defend. Among the protesters themselves, the grievances were as varied as the country. In Chicago, a veteran named Chris Holey told CNN he had never protested anything in his life, but the injustices he was watching unfold made it impossible to stay home. In Minneapolis, a retired Marine named Nijuda Dinasha said he had enlisted 20 years earlier because he believed in the Constitution and that he was now watching constitutional rights get trampled in real time. In a remarkable moment outside a high-rise assisted living center in Chevy Chase, Maryland, elderly people in wheelchairs held signs out toward passing traffic reading "Resist Tyranny, Honk if you want democracy," and "Dump Trump." A 17-year-old in Arlington, Virginia, told a reporter that November would be the first election he was eligible to vote in and that his singular vote was going to mean everything. Many protesters voiced specific frustration about the Iran war, an undeclared, unauthorized conflict that Congress had never voted on, that was killing American service members, that was driving up gas prices, and that many believed was being used by the administration to distract from the cascade of domestic scandals, including the Epstein files, the Board of Peace corruption, the IRS lawsuit, and the constitutional abuses piling up week by week. The protesters understood, even if Washington sometimes did not, that all of these stories are connected. They are all chapters of the same book, and the title of that book is Accountability. Ben Meiselas and the Midas Touch Network, who brought you the coverage of this moment, framed it exactly right. This is not just a protest movement. This is a collective democratic immune response. Millions of ordinary Americans of every age, background, political history, and geography standing up and saying that the system the founders built was not designed for one man's unlimited power, and they are not going to let it become that. The No Kings movement began with the rallying cry that, in America, we do not have kings. On March 28, 2026, 8 million people proved that the cry is still alive, still resonant, still capable of moving mountains, and still, maybe more than at any point in recent American history, necessary. This story is not over. The midterms are in November. The protests will continue. The courts are still fighting. The Democratic resistance in Congress is still pushing back. And we will be here to cover every single development with the depth and the clarity this moment demands. If this video gave you something important to think about, please hit the thumbs up button right now. It takes 1 second and it helps more people find this content at exactly the moment they need it. Subscribe to USA Press and turn on your notification bell so you are always first to know when we break down the stories that matter. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the scale of what happened on March 28, 2026. And leave your thoughts in the comments below. Were you at a No Kings protest? What did you feel when you looked around and saw how many people showed up? We want to hear from you. We read every single comment. We will see you in the next one.